This is all about, obviously, the euro. And it's probably a pretty interesting topic for a lot of you, especially if you live in America. Because like myself, until a couple of years ago, we tend to live in this little bubble called the USA, and the rest of the world is, just something we hear about occasionally on the news. Um, so that's why I really wanted to share this information with you guys today, because the world is quickly becoming much, much smaller. All of the financial markets are obviously tied together, and that's becoming very obvious to everybody, even those of us in the good old US of A. And so what's going to happen when the euro breaks down? And in my opinion, and the opinion of our speaker tonight, that's inevitable, and more likely than not, to take place over the next 2 to 12 months. So what are the consequences for those people who are obviously in Europe, but for those of us here in the West as well? And then what are the opportunities that come with that tragedy as well? So that's what we're here to talk about tonight. This is a presentation that Gonzalo has graciously offered to do for free for Elevation Group readers. This is something that he normally charges a decent amount of money for, but I'll let him tell you a little bit more about his company, the Lira Strategic Planning Group, here tonight. And, Gonzalo, I'm just about ready to turn it over to you. Are you with us right now?
Yeah, I'm right here, so I'm ready to take it away.
Awesome, buddy. So Gonzalo's joining us down from Chile, and again, Gonzalo, thank you so much for doing this for us tonight and for taking us through this topic that is very new to a lot of people, but very, very important, as they will find out here tonight as you go through your presentation. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and hand over control of the webinar to you. If you could just hit share your screen, we'll go ahead and get started.
I do believe you guys are seeing my screen now. You should all be seeing a black swan with the elevationgroup.net/SPG, which is the link that will lead you to my site, which is liraspg.com. Now, let me give you a little bit of background. You, of course, might know this, but for the folks joining us, the Strategic Planning Group is basically a group where we gameplay different scenarios. We originally gameplayed what would happen if hyperinflation were to happen to the US dollar. That was the first scenario. Then from there we have moved on to different scenarios. We have gameplayed the issue of what happens if you personally have to leave the United States. Where would you go? How would you set up an overseas residence, establish a second passport, and so on. The third unit, which we gave about 6 weeks ago, is what happens if and when the euro breaks, which we are currently starting to see. And the next unit that is going to be released on Sunday, as a matter of fact, is the possibility of a war between Israel and Iran, and what effects that would have geopolitically, politically in the United States and Europe, and economically and financially. Now, this presentation that I'm going to give you is the one that I gave to support the when the euro breaks scenario. That scenario was about a 40-page analysis of what would happen. And this presentation that you're going to see supports that analysis. This was the original presentation I gave about 5 weeks ago. And this presentation supported certain recommendations that we made insofar as how to handle the European situation and how to protect your assets and, frankly, maximize profits in this very uncertain time. I'm very proud to say that we made a hard recommendation on May 30th to purchase Swiss francs, and the members who did that have done very, very well for themselves, considering that the Swiss franc has become the go-to currency for refuge from the euro crisis that's going on. So the structure of this presentation is quite simple. We're going to start first by giving a little bit of background and into the whole European situation, and then we're going to move into what we at the Strategic Planning Group anticipate will be the path of the euro, its valuation path, if you will. Now, this analysis of the euro is the key issue, because as the euro falls and then rises, as you will see, different investment opportunities will arise that will naturally flow out of this path of the euro. So let me get started with you. Now, there's an aphorism I have. Aphorism number 3. Never get down in the mud to wrestle with a pig, because you'll only get dirty, and the pig will enjoy it. These are famous words. They were actually originally written by George Bernard Shaw. Now, this is very key about the pigs issue, because the pigs, of course, are Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. Now, these countries are essentially over-indebted. This chart here, which appeared in December of last year in the New York Times, is actually the best chart you will ever see that explains the debt that the various countries owe. If you see there, these sizes are relative. That is, the small blue dot there for Greece, is representative of how much debt it has, total debt it has, versus the total debt of Italy, which is the green blob there, and the total debt of Ireland, the total debt of Spain, and the total debt of Portugal. Now, as you can see, of course, we've been, or let me rephrase that, the Eurocrats have been futzing around with Greece, and as you can see there, the total debt as of December 2010 is $236 billion. I mean, it's quite a bit of money, but insofar as the whole grand scheme of things is concerned, it's pretty small. If you take it as a percentage of the total European Union, you're talking less than 5%. I mean, Greece is small, and so is Portugal. See, the big kahunas here are, of course, Italy and Spain. Now, notice those big arrows. See how those arrows, for instance, in the Italian blob, the $1.4 trillion that Italy owes, they owe $190 billion to Germany. These are all in dollars, by the way. And $511 billion to France. Now, of course, the Italians don't owe it to the French government. They owe it to French banks. French banks are sitting on $500 billion worth of Italian sovereign debt. Okay, that's the issue here. All of this debt is the sovereign debt. That is the debt that the governments have issued. The holders of that debt are all private companies, or banks principally, and of course insurance companies. Now, this is key. We're going to get back to this chart in a little bit, but I just want you to look at this chart and to understand that Greece, which has been the whole hullabaloo about the European sovereign debt, Greece is really the hair of the dog. It's just a little thing. The big one is Italy and Spain, and of course Ireland. So the expectation was what's called the gypsy expectation. That was that the sovereign debt crisis would be in the order of Greece, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, and Italy. That was the expectation up to about 2 weeks ago. But we're going to get to that in a little bit. When 2 weeks ago, just to give you a heads up, the Italian and Spanish debt spiked up to about 6% for no reason. And that, of course, means that the markets, the bond markets, collectively realize that Spain and Italy are teetering. See? So the whole point of bailing out Greece, okay, which just happened, okay, is in order to build a firewall to stop the European sovereign debt crisis from spreading. That was the whole point of it. But the Eurocrats did such a poor job of this whole thing, of dithering and backbiting, and there was the whole issue of Angela Merkel and all the rest of them. They all did such a poor job of this whole situation that finally, Italy and Spain started breaking 2 weeks ago. And so it's sort of like, it was pretty much a waste of time. But anyway, the whole point of Greece, what Greece got bailed out, it was a combination of austerity and haircuts. Haircuts are the common term in finance for when people who have bonds suffer a loss on those bonds. Not a total loss. It's not that they lose 100 cents on the dollar. A haircut is when they lose, anywhere from 1 cent on the dollar to 20 or 30 cents on the dollar. That's what's considered a haircut. Okay, I'm of course simplifying, but it's so that you understand the basic notion of what's going on. Now, the Greek austerity measures are, of course, raising taxes and cutting social services, because the generalized impression, and this is correct, is that Greece basically went on a spending spree. And they bought a whole bunch of stuff and promised their people a whole bunch of social services that they simply could not carry through and finance. And so there's going to be austerity measures, and there are going to be European banks taking haircuts. Now, what did Greece do for this deal? They promised to cut spending and raise taxes, about $28 billion over 5 years. They promised to collect taxes from the top 20%. This is something that people don't quite realize, but Greece is basically Argentina of Europe. You know, the top 20% of the population routinely gets out of paying taxes. And in point of fact, it's been calculated by IMF economists and confirmed by other independent economists that if the Greeks actually had collected the taxes from the top 20% of the population that the top 20% owed, they wouldn't be in the hole that they're in. They would have had, they would not be in the sovereign debt crisis. So this issue of collecting taxes is a big deal, and it remains to be seen if the Greeks will actually do it, because they made the same promise last year for the last bailout. So in exchange, Greece is getting $12 billion from the European Union and the IMF. This is tranche 5 of last year's $110 billion bailout. And they are additionally going to be getting another bailout round, which is going to be approved in September. Now, what did the banks do? Well, they voluntarily rolled over about $3 billion under the so-called French plan. Okay. Now, this affects the Greek bond market maturing over June 2011 through June of 2012. Okay. Basically, the bonds that are being owed between those two dates, rather than the Greek government paying them, the Greek government is going to give those bondholders additional bonds that are going to be for 30 years. Now, it's a very complicated scheme that doesn't really bear, getting into, because basically 70% of the bonds will be rolled over, and of those, about 2/3 will be put into 30-year Greek bonds. Okay, the remaining third will be put into a guarantee fund. This is a zero coupon bond with AAA rating. Yeah, like I say there. Yeah, I don't get it either. It's a very complicated scheme that is designed to keep happy a whole host of people who are very unhappy. There are French bankers, German bankers, the German government, the French government. All of these people are very unhappy, but all of them have conflicting interests, and that's why you have this weird jury-rigged system. Bottom line, this French plan is totally cosmetic because it is voluntary. It was just to provide political cover to the Greeks. The Greek vote to pass the austerity and tax hike measures were also totally cosmetic. It was just to provide European banks with a balance sheet fiction, because this is the key issue. The banks did the European version of extend and pretend. You know, in the United States, how all the banks had all these toxic assets, and so the Federal Reserve, back in March of 2009, suspended some of the accounting rules and some of the capitalization rules, because all the American banks, Citibank, JP Morgan, all these banks, they were all broke. And what did the Fed do? They just allowed the banks to pretend that everything was fine, to pretend that they were capitalized, and it became known as extend and pretend. Because the hope was that by kicking the can down the road, things would eventually get better. And that's exactly what the Europeans and the Greeks are doing. Or let me phrase that. That's what the Europeans are doing insofar as the Greeks are concerned. They are kicking the can down the road, okay? But they did such a poor job of it that they didn't really solve the problem. But anyway, with today's deal, or this was a few weeks ago, there is no credit event, okay? Now, that's the key issue. Let me explain what a credit event is. Now, a credit event is when a bond defaults either in whole or partially. Now, why is this important? Because there are a lot of contracts that depend on the particular sovereign bond not defaulting. Because, for instance, insurance policies. Imagine this. Imagine you have a car, and you have an insurance policy on that car. Now, let's suppose, just for the sake of argument, that you ding that car. Just get a little ding on the side of the door, for instance. Okay? That would be an insurance event. Okay? Because that little